In the 1990s, a disguised serial bank robber terrorizes the Chicago area. Expert with weapons, aware of police procedure, and fearless, he hits hard and disappears fast. Police and the FBI realize the only way to stop him is to catch him in the act. But his desperate violence proves impossible to predict.
The average bank robbery yields roughly $3,000. Yet some criminals risk everything for the take. In suburban Chicago, a disguised gunman began a series of robberies, growing more violent with each one. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Tracking the robber's movements, agents discovered he wasn't alone and would do anything to avoid capture.
March 5th, 1990. Chicago, Illinois.
$1,000?
At a bank on the city's south side, employees began what they thought was a normal workday. The neighborhood was quiet until 10 a.m.
Don't you touch that alarm!
The disguised gunman threatened to kill anyone who didn't follow his orders. The tellers knew not to interfere. It was over in seconds. When they were safe, they called police.
Yes, we just...
The Chicago police patrol officers closest to the bank responded first.
Walked up, got in my face.
The witnesses reported that the robber was a white male, about 6 feet tall.
I was just putting the money up.
But they didn't see details of his features because of his disguise. He wore gloves and carried a police scanner. The man was aggressive, handling his semi-automatic handgun with confidence. He left no fingerprints, and security cameras revealed no other immediate clues. Police canvassed the area, hoping to find other witnesses. A woman who lived near the bank reported that she thought she had seen the robber. She said that at about the time of the robbery, she saw a man who seemed to be wearing a fake beard get into a small 4-door sedan. She did not get the plates, but she did give officers a description of the car. Checking every similar car in the area, they soon found one they believed was the robber's getaway vehicle, abandoned a few blocks from the bank. The officer approached with caution, in case someone was still inside. But it was empty, except for a paper towel covering the broken ignition. A records check revealed the car had been stolen from a mall parking lot 4 days earlier. Later processing produced no leads to the robber. Bank robbery is a federal offense, so police contacted the Chicago FBI.
Hi, this is Keith.
Supervisory Senior Resident Agent Bill Keefe had handled dozens of bank robbery calls.
At that time, we were extremely busy with bank robberies. We had 2 on one day. We were running sometimes as many as 3 robberies a week.
Most were committed by amateurs who went in without a plan and were caught quickly.
And as I said, Shoemaker's already over here.
But when the bank robbery squad reviewed the reports on the South Side robbery, they noted how clean the assault was, obviously well planned. They believed it was not the bearded assailant's first robbery and would not be his last. 2 months later, the robber with the fake beard hit a bank in the suburb of Libertyville.
Give me another drawer.
Not satisfied with cash drawers this time, he ordered a teller to open the vault.
Don't you try anything. Come on, let's go.
He said his police scanner would let him know if anyone hit the silent alarm.
Over from the vault. Put it in there. Come on.
The robber escaped with thousands of dollars in cash. But this time, a teller got the license plate number from his getaway car. While Libertyville police looked for the car, Chicago FBI agents interviewed the tellers. Special Agent Hank Schmidt learned the gunman was more aggressive this time.
He controlled people with the weapon. He would intimidate them by putting the gun up towards their face. He pointed the gun directly at someone when he talked to them, which was intimidating to the tellers and the customers.
Although interviews yielded no clues, police did find the getaway car, abandoned a few blocks from the bank. Again, the vehicle had been stolen from a mall 3 days earlier. And as before, the thief used a towel to hide the broken ignition. FBI Special Agent Dave Childry was part of the robbery squad. The squad uncovered an earlier robbery in Wilmette, Illinois, believed to be committed by the same man. One surveillance camera photo provided a frightening clue.
There was a very good picture of the robber taken in which he was using what we call a weaver stance. This is a shooting position taught to police officers. It was taught to FBI agents. And if you have been taught to shoot like that, you recognize it. This person might have had some law enforcement training.
If so, he would know how these investigations work, and he could prove very difficult to catch. The local press dubbed him the Bearded Bandit. Investigators took advantage of the coverage to ask citizens for help. They published enhanced stills from the robberies, hoping someone would recognize him despite the disguise.
We put his picture on the news. He did wear a beard, a fake beard and mustache, and a ball cap. So after running those pictures, we were not getting any tips from the public.
In November 1990, the elusive bandit hit a bank in Wheeling, Illinois. A teller hit the alarm before he was told not to.
All available units, please respond to a 1090 at the Wheeling Bank and Trust.
Over his scanner, the gunman heard the police responding.
No contact.
He didn't leave the bank, which would be the normal reaction of bank robbers. They're there to rob the bank. They're not there to get involved in a shootout with the police. He stayed in the bank while the police were responding and held the gun up to the cashier and counted down from 10.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
It seemed he knew how long he had before police responded. More evidence he might be a cop.
He started moving further.
As the robberies continued, It looked like the bandit purposely chose targets in different jurisdictions to complicate the investigation.
No bank was ever hit the second time. The robberies would be on the other end of the suburban area against Lake Michigan, and then they would be out in Schaumburg or Elk Grove Village or up north in Lake County, such as Libertyville.
As he struck in new suburbs, the FBI had to coordinate with a growing number of police departments. Palatine, Illinois Police Chief John Kozel, a detective sergeant at the time, learned of the case and that the bandits' getaway cars belonged to shopping mall employees, stolen at the beginning of their shifts.
He would steal one of the employee cars knowing that it would not be reported stolen for approximately 8 hours. So he knew he had 8 hours to get the vehicle to where he needed to put it before anyone would even discover it missing and it would become hot on the system.
When dumping the cars, the robber did his best to interfere with the ongoing investigation, wiping them clean of fingerprints and leaving no trace of himself behind.
It was very apparent that he was aware of evidence-gathering techniques, of police methods.
In the end, agents found nothing of evidentiary value in any of the cars. Since the cars didn't help identify the bandit, investigators followed every conceivable lead that might. They visited theatrical shops around the city, hoping a salesperson might recognize the man with the fake beard as a customer. Again, nothing. The Bearded Bandit committed 7 armed bank robberies in the Chicago area between January 1990 and February 1991. Then, the robberies stopped.
We went over what we had done to that point in time, looked for things we might have missed. Maybe he'd been incarcerated somewhere. Maybe he'd moved out of state. Maybe he was dead. We just didn't know.
The bandit's trail stayed cold for 9 months. On November 4th, 1991, Palatine police officer Kevin Maher was working the day shift. A dispatcher in training rode along to learn procedure.
I was heading southbound on Quinton Road when I saw a vehicle heading northbound, and I looked in my side view mirror and I thought what I saw was an expired tag. So I made a U-turn and I was telling my ride-along that we were gonna go up and see if this vehicle had expired plates, and if it did, I would conduct a traffic stop and show him how we conduct a traffic stop and how we punch all the numbers into the computer.
It was supposed to be a routine stop.
The person driving the vehicle swerved over to the side of the road and jammed on the brakes. He's got a gun.
Maher's first instinct was to protect his passenger. The Bearded Bandit was back. In November 1991, a routine Chicago area traffic stop erupted in violence when a man shot Palatine police officer Kevin Maher.
I was in a state of shock because it was broad daylight, it was 11 o'clock, and it was a quiet residential street, and it was a basic ambush. And after he fired the first round came through the windshield and struck me in the shoulder, and glass from the windshield struck me in the left ear.
Unit for your location.
officer down.
The officer down call went out on the Illinois State Police Emergency Radio Network.
8144, Schaumburg's en route with their K9.
From more than a dozen surrounding suburbs, police and emergency personnel rushed to the scene. Maher realized one of the shots that pierced his windshield was aimed dead center and might have hit him in the head had he not moved to protect his passenger and reversed the car.
Arlington PD is inquiring if you want any aircraft out there, helicopter or plane.
While paramedics treated Maher, officers questioned him. As a police officer, he was a perfect witness. Trained in recalling details, he gave them a description of the gunman, the car's license plates, the type of gun, and the direction in which the attacker escaped.
We got a male white, 6 foot, 200 pounds, beard, hat, last seen going south from the scene. So let's spread out, start looking for the car. Which way do you want to go, Matt? I'll go that way.
Police fanned out to find the shooter. More than 100 officers joined the search.
You guys check it out. 684485.
3 blocks from the location of the attack, police found the shooter's vehicle. It had been reported stolen from a mall parking lot 5 days earlier. Palatine Police Chief John Kozel realized the grave danger.
When someone is willing to shoot at a police officer on a routine traffic stop, we all realize that he's willing to shoot at anyone. His determination to escape is much greater than his concern for the safety of anyone. That would be a law enforcement officer, a citizen on the street. When you're willing to shoot a policeman, you're willing to shoot anyone.
Kozel helped coordinate the search for the deadly gunman.
We immediately set up a perimeter with the assistance of the state, county, and local officers in the area. We had K9s on the scene. We had a chopper in the air. We notified the schools in the area to stay locked down.
Evidence technicians began to process the car. The ignition was broken, the damage covered by a paper towel. They looked for fingerprints that might help them identify the perpetrator, but found none. Canine handlers brought in their dogs, which are trained to remember a scent from a specified place, then follow only that scent, ignoring others. But the trail ended not far from the vehicle. Despite the massive effort, the suspect somehow slipped away.
Over Eastburn that we're releasing all units other than Cook County, Rolling Meadows, Arlington Heights units, and state units that are securing the perimeter.
10-4.
In addition to taking it personal when one of our officers is shot, we all know that a citizen is much more likely to be injured or killed, and we work that much harder to bring him to justice.
For more resources, they called in the FBI and Supervisory Special Agent Bill Keefe.
I was asked to come over to the Palatine Police Department by the Chief of Police. There had been a composite sketch drawn, and everybody was reviewing the circumstances of the shooting.
For nearly 2 years, Keefe and his squad had been working the Bearded Bandit case.
I had asked if we could look at the car that was found, and when I looked at the ignition, this was our bank robber.
After being treated, Officer Maher came to the station to look at surveillance photos of the Bearded Bandit. He said the bank robber did look like the man who shot him.
We surmised that he was on his way to do a bank robbery. He knew once the officer ran the plate, the car would come back stolen. He also knew that with the guns he had in his vehicle, it's not something he could conceal if the officer walked up to the vehicle.
The Bearded Bandit had made a huge leap in violence.
This guy wasn't going to go away. We were going to have to come up with a very innovative way to either identify him and charge him, or that we were going to have to catch him in the act.
Chief Kozel brought the many investigators together.
After the initial search, we set up a multi-jurisdictional task force here at our police department. We had the FBI, the state police, Cook County Sheriff's Police, and all the local agencies from our area and those involved in the Bearded Bank Robber series.
Since their suspect seemed to know police procedure, they adjusted it.
We learned we had a violent bank robber that was using a scanner. We were no longer giving out the location of the bank over the air. We were giving out a code number for each particular bank.
Robbery in progress. Go ahead and give us code.
The task force hoped patrol officers in the area could use the codes to respond to robbery calls without the bandit realizing it.
Especially you undercover agents.
Confident that the Bearded Bandit would resume his crime spree eventually, police began doing spot checks of banks throughout the region. On November 18th, 2 weeks after the shooting, Elk Grove Village, Illinois police officers saw nothing suspicious at one bank on their list. But later that morning, a woman leaving a nearby business did. Two people in obvious disguises entering the bank. After a police shooting in the Chicago area that was linked to the Bearded Bandit, the gunman reappeared in Elk Grove Village, Illinois, this time with an accomplice.
911, can I help you?
While a witness outside the bank called police,
There's something very strange going on here. Okay, thank you.
the robbers struck. The bandit demanded money from the vault, his accomplice standing guard. 911 dispatch, aware of the Bearded Bandit, used a prearranged code to alert officers.
2130, 2132, code green.
Without revealing information over the police scanner. They also alerted the FBI. Special Agent Hank Schmidt realized the new danger.
The big concern is that the robber, in some cases, discharges the weapon when he's using it to gesture at the employees. So the potential for violence is always there. The numbers obviously increase if we have two people that are armed.
In the bank, the manager explained they could not get into the time delay vault.
Okay, ma'am, can you hold
The dispatcher instructed the witness outside to leave in case there was gunplay.
Move it!
With the money from the cash drawers, the robbers fled. Unaware the police had been called, the teller hit the alarm. Elk Grove Village officers approached with their sirens off, quietly surrounding the bank. If the robbers were still inside and heard police, they might take hostages. Officers were in even more danger, according to Palatine Chief John Kozel.
For the first time, we had two bearded individuals rob a bank. That, of course, increased our sense of urgency even more. Now we had two armed gunmen to deal with when law enforcement arrives at these banks.
2600, can you call the bank, find out if...
Through the dispatcher, police talked with bank employees. The manager said the robbers had left. The officers had to be sure. The robbers could be holding a gun on the manager, forcing her to lie.
Okay, we're gonna need to have somebody from the bank step out.
The dispatcher asked them to send one employee outside to talk to police.
Tell me who that is gonna be. She's about
The manager gave them the description of the woman chosen to go.
She's a brown necklace. Female subject 25.
Indian descent, 5 feet tall, thin build.
2600, have the official come out. Okay, I see her coming out.
Hi, are you aware there was a bank alarm here?
Yes.
Is there anybody hurt inside?
The employee assured them the assailants were gone and no one was injured inside.
All right, guys, the bank is clear. Go on inside.
The officers moved in to clear the bank for certain.
One of the witnesses told us that she believed that the second person, a smaller person, was possibly a woman disguised as a man.
After the Elk Grove Village robbery, police recovered 2 cars with the bandit's signature ignition covering. It was more evidence of his criminal sophistication.
To cleanse himself after leaving the bank, he would drop the one off a block from the bank that he had just gotten into, that all the witnesses had seen him leave the bank in, and he would go a few blocks away and get into the other vehicle that he had left there previous, and then since cleanse himself from that first hot vehicle.
All of the cars were similar, according to Special Agent Dave Childry.
We were able to kind of key in the cars by the type, the make, the size, the non-visibility of them. They were just everyday cars.
He was stealing them, then letting them sit for several days before using them as getaway cars. The task force asked to be notified of similar cars stolen from area shopping malls.
We were successful in getting information on cars of that type that were stolen in the northwest suburbs and in the city of Chicago. We would put that information out on a weekly basis.
Agent Scott Backen from the FBI and Sergeant Steve Pearson from Chicago PD actually went to every roll call of approximately 50 to 60 law enforcement agencies and spoke to the individual officers on the need to find these cars. Those personal visits mean a lot more than just putting something out on a teletype.
Somewhere in the metro area, they hoped to find a getaway car after the bandit stole it, but before he used it in a robbery. Weeks later, Officer Tom Polinsky was checking an apartment building parking lot in Niles, Illinois, when he spotted a stolen car on their list. It did look like the Bearded Bandit's work.
The agreement was if they found one of those, and it did turn out to be stolen when they ran the license plate, that they would back off and notify us. That happened. We set up a surveillance on that vehicle.
FBI agents and Niles police officers and detectives watched from an empty apartment overlooking the stolen car, 24 hours a day.
On December 13th, we found out that the Rolling Meadows police had located another stolen car that was in all probability one of the Bearded Bandit's cars.
Chief Kozel was sure they were right.
These 2 particular vehicles were both stolen out of large mall areas. Both were owned by employees of those malls. The MO was perfect.
They set up surveillance on the second car, in Rolling Meadows, too.
Rolling Meadows PD stepped up. They shared time, detectives, intelligence, sat with our agents out there 24 hours a day.
To further ensure the bandit did not slip away, the FBI wanted to install tracking devices in the vehicles. But they couldn't do so in the parking lots. Late one night, agents removed the 2 cars. and replaced them with lookalikes for a few hours. It was a risky move. The thief could return at any time and spot the agents or the decoy cars. At the FBI garage, technicians installed the remote tracking devices in each vehicle. They also equipped the cars with remote kill switches that would allow agents to shut down the engines from a distance. They put the cars back and waited. Days passed.
There was a nagging doubt in all of our minds that maybe we had been discovered, that perhaps he had seen one of us or a police officer going in and out of this apartment they were using to watch the car in Niles, that he had seen somebody near the car in Rolling Meadows, and that he was just going to back off these cars and never come back. We weren't sure. We just didn't know, but we were committed to watching these cars until something told us otherwise.
After a week, the vigil paid off. A van pulled up, and a man approached one of the cars.
This was, in my mind, a do-or-die effort. This is going to be our only shot. If we miss this, he's going to know we're onto him.
They hoped they could peacefully end the bandits' crime spree. But no one had forgotten the last time the gunman was cornered. In 1991, Chicago area investigators watched two stolen cars they believed were going to be used in the Bearded Bandit's next holdup. A man entered one of the cars. Special Agent Hank Schmidt believed it was their suspect.
He matched the general physical description of the person we were looking for as the bearded robber.
We have our man, we have our man.
The man had been dropped off at the vehicle by someone driving a van.
Mini wagon and a white van.
Heading southbound down the alley.
When he drove away, the van followed. Investigators could not identify either driver. They had to be careful. If the Bearded Bandit and his accomplice spotted a tail, they might start shooting. But FBI technicians had installed a tracking device in the car, allowing agents to follow at a distance. The suspect parked the stolen car near a suburban bank.
Mini wagon is parking. The van is behind him.
Hearing the news, Supervisory Special Agent Bill Keefe believed they finally found their target.
When that vehicle showed up in the vicinity of a bank, our adrenaline really was pumped up, and we really knew that we were going to have it.
This car was likely the first getaway car for the next day's robbery. Agents believed the two suspects would next pick up the second stolen car in Rolling Meadows.
Standing down.
They were right.
Got some of this stuff now. I got a male, white male.
That vehicle was also equipped with a tracking device.
Okay, the van is leaving. Red car is pulling out behind it. 10-4.
Surveillance agents followed that car, believed to be a secondary getaway car, to a hardware store about 20 miles from the bank where the pair left it.
Okay, looks like he's getting back into the van. All right, they're pulling out. Unit 2, go ahead and follow.
With both suspects in the van, agents no longer had the benefit of a tracking device and had to stay close. They followed the van into Hanover Park, Illinois, and watched as it pulled up to a townhouse. Now, Special Agent Dave Childry could identify the people inside.
We had a license plate and two vague descriptions of people, a man and a woman. Normal record checks on that license plate would tell us that that van belonged to Jeffrey and Jill Erickson.
The FBI and police worked through the night to learn more.
We had done a lot of research, calling police departments, trying to see who these people were. We were looking for a previous arrest record, which we didn't find. During this process, we had received some information that Jeffrey Erickson had been a police officer.
In 1986, Jeffrey Erickson worked as a patrol officer in a Chicago suburb. He distinguished himself as a skilled marksman, but he was uninterested in the everyday requirements of the job: traffic stops, paperwork. He was about to be fired when he resigned. Records also showed that Jeffrey Erickson opened a used bookstore in early 1991, during the time the Bearded Bandit was on hiatus. It appeared he and his wife Jill, a university chemistry student, led a double life, using bank robbery money to build a middle-class existence. He might not have seemed threatening on the surface, but Special Agent Schmidt knew he was.
Because he's a trained individual, he knows how we're going to react. He can plan ahead for that, and if he's trained with a weapon, he's going to be more professional in the way he handles that weapon, and he's going to be a bigger threat to us.
Investigators considered waiting until the Ericksons approached a bank the next day, but decided not to risk a shootout near employees and customers.
We had enough that we did not have to get him in the vicinity of a bank. The safest approach would be when he came to the car, the stolen car, we would arrest him.
While surveillance units watched the suspect's home, a SWAT team set up near the car in the hardware store parking lot. Police Chief John Kozel.
The SWAT team set up on the vehicles were very well aware of his background and knew that he may shoot first, and they were taking that into account.
By the morning, they were ready for the Ericksons to make their move.
About mid-morning, the surveillance units advised us that the van was in fact moving from the residence with at least two people. They were heading in the direction of where we were watching the stolen car. The surveillance team advised us that Mr. Erickson had got out of the vehicle in an adjoining parking lot.
He's walking away. Yeah, the driver's in the van still. He's walking west.
The FBI had installed a kill switch in the stolen car, which they could use to turn off the engine from a distance.
We watched him come around the corner from that other parking lot, go to the vehicle, and enter the vehicle and start that vehicle.
Kill it.
Erickson was distracted by the car trouble.
Okay, let's go in.
The SWAT team moved in.
Out of the car! Put your hands where I can see them. Get back out of that bag! Out of the car, put your hands where I can see them.
I know that the pressure of to shoot or not shoot is a split-second decision.
To the bag. Get your hands up. Back in there. Get out of the car.
And most law enforcement officers don't want to have to shoot an individual if they don't have to. No one wants to take a life that way. We felt like we controlled him.
Out of the car! Slowly!
After twice reaching for his bag, Erickson finally followed orders.
On the ground.
If he'd come out of the bag with a gun, it would have been an entirely different situation. I asked him as we were transporting him after the arrest to the federal lockup, you being a former police officer, you would know that a gesture like that could get you shot. And he looked at me and he said, well, I figured you'd shoot me in the head and it would be over with quickly.
In the car, agents searched Erickson's bag and found the Bearded Bandit's tools, loaded guns, a police scanner, gloves, a beard and a wig.
His bank robbery kit in that bag, it was very helpful to the case. Without that information or that evidence, we just arrested a car thief.
Having Jeffrey Erickson safely in custody was only half the job. In the adjoining parking lot, the SWAT team approached the van. It might be Jill Erickson inside.
You in the van!
Agents scrambled to follow. The chase barreled through 11 suburban jurisdictions, reaching speeds of 110 miles per hour. A roadblock didn't work.
She had fired multiple rounds out of that van, either at the pursuing agents or other people in traffic. It was a big concern for the agents that she might hit an innocent civilian.
Agents shot out the rear tires of the van. But the driver was not giving up. In 1991, a suspected bank robber led police and FBI agents on a dangerous chase through the Chicago suburbs. The fleeing van turned into an area that investigators knew had no outlet. They blocked the road. As the van charged them, they had to fire. They saw movement inside. Then, an FBI agent cautiously approached. The driver was wounded, a single self-inflicted gunshot. It was Jill Erickson. Later that night, in the hospital, she died. Special Agent Hank Schmidt.
We believed it may have been a pact that they had both come up with, that they would not be arrested. She that day carried out her part of the pact, and that day he decided, for whatever reason, he didn't.
Inside the van were spent cartridge casings, blood, fibers, other ammunition, other weapons. There was a rifle with several hundred rounds of ammunition. That whole neighborhood became an evidentiary nightmare. There were bullets that Jill had fired, stuck in the side of houses, in cars, on the street.
The FBI obtained a federal search warrant for the Ericksons' home.
We found some loose cash, but what impressed me was the amount of firepower in the house. An arrest at that home would have evolved into a shootout. In that home, there was a weapon everywhere that you would find a picture or a statue or a knick-knack in any other home.
Among the weapons found was the .223 caliber semi-automatic assault rifle used in the attack on Officer Kevin Maher. Chief John Kozel realized a shootout would have been deadly to both sides.
The weapons in his home were as good as any law enforcement has as far as firepower goes. Most of the long guns he had, that type of ammunition would zip right through an officer's bulletproof vest.
Another discovery in the house spoke to the couple's mindset.
One of the things that we found quite ironic was the television was on and the VCR was on, and there was a Bonnie and Clyde tape in the VCR, and it was queued up to the point where the Bonnie and Clyde are being shot to death in the movie, and it was obvious that that was something they watched before they went out and did their bank robberies.
Turn your head to the right.
Though one robber was dead and one in custody, the violence was not yet over. Jeffrey Erickson's trial began on July 13, 1992. The evidence compiled against him was strong.
In all conversations with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the trial was going very well. They were very upbeat about it, and the evidence was, in their mind, going to be enough to convict him.
But then, after court adjourned on July 20th, 1992, two deputy U.S. Marshals loaded Erickson and several jail inmates onto an elevator. Erickson was still dressed for court. The prisoners were headed for a van that would take them to the Metropolitan Correctional Center. By the time the elevator reached the parking garage, Erickson had somehow escaped his cuffs. Erickson shot U.S. Marshal Bill Frakes in the back and head, killing him. Ambushed, Frakes had not had time to draw his weapon. As the gunman ran for the street, court security officer and former Chicago police detective Harry Belwomany confronted him. Erickson shot the police veteran in the chest. But before Belwomany died, he got off 4 rounds, fatally wounding Erickson. The gunman was 40 feet from the crowded streets when he died.
The thing is, all these resources were brought to bear on an individual. He was captured and was being tried in court. You think the case is over, but unfortunately, the only person that could stop this individual turned out to be a very brave, courageous policeman named Harry Belwomany, who, while dying, shot and killed Jeff Erickson.
A newlywed, Bill Frakes was a promising young lawman just 9 months into his career. Harry Belwomany was a 31-year veteran. 2 of his children are also Chicago police officers, carrying on his legacy. In a world where money is everything and life means nothing, a drug gang stalks the streets of Chicago. They are heavily armed, well-funded, and have dangerous international contacts. It will take every weapon in the FBI's arsenal to stop a deadly threat known as the Rukns.
1980s, the drug trade ravaged Chicago's inner-city neighborhoods. Heroin and cocaine sales soared. Violent crime threatened to destroy the community. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As drug profits grew, gangs ruled the streets. One of the most dangerous was called El Rukn. Agents teamed up with state and local police to bring them down, but in the process, uncovered a bizarre and frightening terrorist plot.
Chicago, Illinois. In the early 1980s, it is one of the deadliest major cities in America. Powerful drug gangs have transformed the South Side from a neighborhood into a war zone. To combat the rising tide of violence, the FBI forms the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. In Chicago, their prime target is a vicious gang known as the El Rukns. John Podliska is an assistant U.S. attorney in Chicago.
The business of the El Rukns was to traffic in narcotics, cocaine and heroin, and to control a vast area on the south side of Chicago for purposes of selling and distributing those narcotics. They would exact tribute from other people who would want to sell in that area, and they had a reputation, and a well-deserved reputation, for being one of, if not the most successful and the most violent criminal drug-dealing organizations in the Chicago area.
In the spring of 1985, several members split from the gang. They try to move in on El Rukn territory. Revenge is swift and deadly. Chicago's South Side is gripped by a vicious turf war. As the murder rate climbs, the FBI seems powerless to stop the violence. Then, in May, an informant gives agents a tip. Several members of the El Rukn gang have left Chicago. They are hiding out in a house in Cleveland. Many of them are wanted for murder. FBI agents and Cleveland police raid the house and arrest several suspects. One of them is a man named Anthony Sumner. Sumner is a former El Rukn general, which makes him potentially useful. If investigators can turn him, they can get intelligence on the secret of El Rukns.
Sumner, how you doing?
Detectives question Sumner for hours. He implicates himself in a double homicide in Chicago and is facing serious time. Authorities offer to reduce charges, but only if Sumner tells them everything he knows about the El Rukns. Finally, the former El Rukn general agrees to cooperate. As Sumner talks to authorities, a terrifying picture emerges. The El Rukn gang has hundreds of members. They're heavily armed, they're well organized, and they're growing. The entire organization is run by Jeff Fort, a kingpin known for his efficiency and his brutality.
He was at the top, controlling the entire organization. Directly below him were 21 generals, and he preserved his power that way. If anyone tried to seize power from him, from amongst those 21 generals, there were 20 other people who would be in a position to let him know that, and he could retaliate.
Authorities thought they had taken Ford out of commission. In 1983, he was convicted of cocaine trafficking and sentenced to 13 years in a Texas prison. According to Sumner, Jeff Fort continues to run the El Rukns. He uses the prison payphones to contact his gang in Chicago. Sumner's statement is a major break in the El Rukn case, according to Assistant U.S. Attorney Patrick Deedy.
He was the first person to actually confirm what the authorities had thought for a long time, which was that Jeff Fort, who was currently in penitentiary in Texas, was regularly talking on the telephone to members of the El Rukns in Chicago and coordinating or directing activities of the organization.
The El Rukns run their operation out of a converted movie theater on the south side of Chicago.
It had been fortified by the El Rukns and was essentially a fortified fortress. He had people at the headquarters of the El Rukns who were required to sit by that phone 24 hours a day. There was always someone at the phone so that when he called, he could give his instructions, directions, and orders as to what he wanted done with his organization.
For the task force, Jeff Fort's telephone conversations are an opportunity to learn more about the organization.
Yes, Imam.
No one questioned what he said and what he wanted done. There was absolutely no debate, discussion, objection to anything that he was saying.
And so the FBI over the summer 1985 began to develop evidence to provide a sufficient probable cause to go and to begin to listen to these conversations.
Agents activated 24-hour wiretap to record the kingpin's phone calls. Tom Coram is a former special agent with the FBI. In 1985, he is assigned to the Drug Task Force and the El Rukn case.
The technicians installed the wiretap equipment through the telephone company. Nothing was actually installed at the prison. We did all of our monitoring, in fact, in Austin, Texas, which was 40 to 50 miles away from Bastrop, Texas, where the prison was located. We were really stunned when we started hearing the conversation from Fort, because he was speaking with key gang leaders in Chicago, and what we were hearing was just strings of words.
Jeff Fort and his gang are talking in code.
And the kinds of series of words that we would hear said would be things like, in the science of Taku, love, truth, perfect man. And we had no idea what these words meant. And we couldn't establish any form of reference to figure out what he was saying during these conversations.
Agents believe that Fort and the El Rukns are discussing drug deals.
Okay.
But until they crack the gang's code, they can't prove a thing.
One of the Chicago police officers came up with really a very good idea. The Chicago Police Department had uniformed officers almost on a daily basis make some sort of contact with the El Rukn gang members just to let them know that the Chicago Police Department was in the neighborhood and that they were being watched. And so the Chicago detective came up with the idea of having one of the uniformed officers go up to the gang headquarters, speak to one of the gang leaders while Jeff Fort was on the telephone, and see if the gang members would encode what the police officer had said to the gang member and then feed it back to Jeff Fort in the coded form. And what we heard was the gang member come back up to the telephone where Jeff Fort was on the phone at the time and then encode that statement that had been made to him by the police officer. So at that point we learned the code words for one, the word for pound, and the word for marijuana.
Now what about?
And the word for marijuana we found out at that time was perfect man.
Again?
Breaking the El Rukn code is slow, painstaking work. After 2 months, agents only know a fraction of the gang's business.
we realized that we were missing a lot of the calls that were being made from other phones at the El Rukn headquarters in Chicago. So we knew that the operation that we were running in Texas needed to be concluded, and we needed to set operations back up in Chicago and begin monitoring all of the phones inside the gang headquarters in order to get the whole story.
In December, Agent Coram and his team decide to move the wiretap operation to Chicago. They establish a new listening post near El Rukn headquarters. As authorities activate the new wiretap, they encounter a familiar problem.
When we turned the wire on in Chicago, I found that once again I was hearing words that I didn't understand.
The El Rukn gang is using a new code. They may have found out the FBI was listening. Once again, Agent Coram can't understand what they're saying.
It was like we had to start all over again when I thought we would be able to pick up where we left off when we shut the operation down in Texas.
Hour after hour, Coram listens to the recordings. He slowly pieces together phrases.
He's talked about New York.
Something is different. Something has changed.
Some of the words I started picking up were words like up. I started hearing words that related to travel, and there hadn't been any words that related to travel during the Texas operation. I started hearing references to New York, and I eventually heard a reference to Libya that really caused me to be really, really concerned about what changes had occurred during the 3 or 4 months that we had not been monitoring the telephones.
It's a chilling discovery. Libya, a rogue nation in North Africa, is suspected of state-sponsored terrorism. A well-armed drug gang, combined with foreign terrorists, could pose a deadly threat to national security. In Chicago, an FBI wiretap reveals that Jeff Fort continues to run the El Rukn gang from prison.
Bring it all back to me.
Although the gang talks in code, authorities learn they are discussing Libya, a country suspected of terrorism. Investigators of the Chicago Drug Task Force spend hours listening to the recorded conversations. To Special Agent Tom Coram, it doesn't make sense. Why is a Chicago drug gang talking about Libya?
I went back to the beginning and started listening to the conversations again, and I started piecing the bits and pieces of the conversation together and came to the conclusion that they were talking about having met with someone in Libya who was going to provide them with money for destroying an airplane here in the United States.
Coram alerts the U.S. Attorney's Office. The drug investigation has uncovered a potential terrorist plot. The FBI calls in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Special Agent Ned Hamara is assigned to the Terrorism Task Force in Chicago.
We took it seriously because we had no idea whether it was real or not. It was decided that the Terrorism Task Force take over the wire and continue an investigation and determine what, if anything, was going on. The Drug Task Force offered their agents to help with overhearing the wire talk and recorded conversations.
If authorities hope to unravel El Rukn's plans, they need to decipher the new code quickly and completely.
This is the conversation.
At that time, we took our surveillance teams and put them to work.
Fred Wheat is a lieutenant with the Chicago Police Department. His specialty is surveillance. In 1985, Wheat is assigned to the FBI's Terrorism Task Force.
We were brought in because they knew that they would need surveillance, and also that a number of the Chicago police officers had worked El Rukns before and would be helpful in setting up the strategy to work this organization.
The surveillance team's job is to make physical observations that can be compared to the information agents are hearing on the wiretap.
We basically had round-the-clock surveillance on different members of the group who were involved with the conversations with Jeff Fort. We were watching those members and just trying to follow their activities. On one instance, one of the gang members reads a newspaper article to Jeff Fort and substitutes the code word for the actual newsprint. So, I mean, we had a verbatim interpretation of some of those code words because he describes an incident on the south side of Chicago where there was a shooting involving a landlord and a neighbor of some sort. And so we were able to take those code words and go back to previous conversations, insert them into conversations, which solved a lot of our deciphering of some coded conversations.
Okay. That's it.
Slowly, agents crack the new code. Ron Reddy is a special agent with the FBI's Chicago field office.
The calls that are being intercepted at the Rukn headquarters basically concern two areas. They concern the Rukn's normal business of engaging in drug transactions, as well as what we are beginning to realize is a plot between the Rukns and the government of Libya.
How'd it go?
Knowing the violent history of this particular organization, we were afraid that the Rukns were going to commit an act of terrorism in the United States in order to obtain money from the Libyan government.
From the wiretap, authorities learned that several members of the Rukn gang recently traveled to Libya. As agents continue to monitor the gang's conversations, the situation with Libya deteriorates. On April 2nd, 1986, a bomb detonates aboard TWA Flight 840 between Rome and Athens. 4 Americans are killed. 9 are injured. The FBI suspects the government of Libya and President Muammar Gaddafi are responsible for the carnage.
On April 4th of 1986, there was a series of conversations between Jeff Fort and a general in the Rukn organization known as Melvin Mays. And they discussed this explosion on this flight between Rome and Greece. And Mays, at one point in the conversation, indicates that their group would be able to do something like that within 30 to 50 days.
Yeah. It is a terrifying prospect.
I want you to take a video.
Via the decoded wiretap, the task force listens in on Fort's plans. The gang leader wants 2 of his generals, Leon McAnderson and Rico Cranshaw, to make another trip to Libya.
Fort was really concerned about how are we going to convince the Libyans, that we're an organization that can do something for them. One of the things that we were able to determine, he talked about getting newspaper clippings to take back over there to show the Libyans that this is what we've been doing, this is what we can do. Violent things that happen that the Rukns are responsible for. The whole idea was to convince the Libyans that the Rukns were an organization big enough to commit some significant terrorist activity or acts in the United States on their behalf. We believed it was a real threat.
If McAnderson and Cranshaw return to Libya, federal agents will not be far behind. In Chicago, FBI agents and police wiretap the Rukn gang. 2 of Jeff Fort's generals are planning a trip overseas to convince Libyan officials that Rukn can perform terrorist acts within the United States. Travel restrictions to Libya make the trip impossible. Ron Reddy is a special agent with the FBI assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
The United States had just engaged in at least 2 military actions against the Libyans, and the Rukns knew that the Libyans were under scrutiny from the United States government. The Rukns, as well as the Libyans, felt that the safest place for them to meet would be in Panama, which they called the Straw Hat. That was their particular code word for Panama.
Everybody's unmarked.
Cranshaw and McAnderson, 2 high-ranking Rukn generals, will make the trip to Panama City. The task force needs surveillance on both men from the moment they leave Chicago until they return. On May 3rd, Cranshaw and McAnderson leave Rukn headquarters. The surveillance team is not far behind. The Rukns board a jet in Chicago, bound for Miami. From there, they fly to Panama. In Panama, Cranshaw and McAnderson are seen entering the Libyan embassy, presumably to meet with government officials. And on May 10th, the 2 Rukns return to the United States.
We knew when they were coming back, and we worked with our colleagues at U.S. Customs and asked them to do a search of these individuals when they arrived in Miami.
They found a document in Rico Crenshaw's luggage, which they photographed. Crenshaw and McAnderson were not aware that this was happening, but the document was in Crenshaw's handwriting.
Basically, they had written a letter that said that they had 5-man cells in cities throughout the United States and that they were interested in trying to destabilize the government.
The next day, on May 11th, the task force intercepts several telephone conversations between the 2 Rukns and their leader, Jeff Fort. Cranshaw and McAnderson tell Fort the Libyans have agreed to provide financing. They will deposit the money in a Panamanian bank in the United States. An attorney they met in Panama will contact them shortly. For the task force, it's a terrifying development. But agents don't have enough evidence to prosecute the Rukn gang on conspiracy charges.
In order for the FBI to establish that a crime has been committed, we must collect enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the conspiracy had actually taken place and that there was an intended goal of the conspiracy. And we had to prove that there was a serious plan to commit an act of terrorism here in the United States.
Agents continue to listen to the wiretap, hoping to learn more.
During June, Fort talks about sending Rukns over to Libya to learn bomb-making skills. He said, we can send some of the soldiers or members over there. They could learn how to make bombs. Those individuals can come back to the United States and teach other members how to make bombs.
As alarming as this scenario is, it's still not enough to prove a conspiracy. Weeks go by. The money from the Libyans never shows up. Fort panics. He will do anything to make the deal.
In late June, early July, Fort became, he just saw that the money was not going to be coming from the Libyans and that he had to do something, or the Rukns had to do something to show the Libyans, that they were somebody to respect. He talked about damaging a government building. He talked about planting bombs. He talked about blowing up an airplane.
and he talked about getting a rocket, one that you can use once and throw away. So we figured, okay, how can we address this issue?
Through the wiretaps we're hearing.
Fort wants to buy military-grade weapons. The task force decides to use it to their advantage by becoming El Rukn's sole supplier.
Okay. So enter Special Agent Willie Hulon. Willie was on the drug task force. He had already made one drug buy with Alan Knox through an FBI cooperating source.
Alan Knox is a high-ranking El Rukn. Agents assume he is aware of Fort's plans.
So we figured that we'd set up another drug buy with Alan Knox, and at which point Special Agent Hulon could introduce the idea that he had a weapons contact and so on, and that they might be able to supply the El Rukns or somebody else with weapons or any military equipment.
He mentions that he has a friend who works at a military base, a friend who can steal weapons. Knox is interested.
Willie Hulon is an amazing individual. He's cool, calm, collected, works well under pressure. He was ideal for this situation. His knowledge of the street gangs, his calmness and operating sources, and Willie was perfect for this role.
Knox tells Hulon about the kind of weapons the gang wants to buy.
They were interested in grenade launchers, and so when he described the grenade launchers, he said it's the type that Clint Eastwood used in the movie, which obviously is a law rocket.
The M72 Law rocket is the U.S. Army's primary light anti-tank weapon. The shoulder-launched missile can penetrate a foot of armor at a range of over 200 meters. It can destroy a tank, a building, or even a low-flying airliner. Agents cannot allow El Rukn to obtain such a deadly weapon on the open market. But the development does offer unique opportunities.
We decided that why not we supply, or the FBI supply, the El Rukns with a rocket.
Special Agent Willie Hulon negotiates with Alan Knox on the price.
You guys doing all right? Thank you. Yeah.
He tells Knox he can get Law rockets for $1,850 apiece.
Got a man on the inside.
Obviously, we weren't going to sell these guys a Law rocket that they could use or would even work. But that being said, we wanted to sell them a device that looked like a real Law rocket, and on a cursory inspection would appear to them to be a real Law rocket.
And they will buy for that $2,200.
The ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, constructs a dummy Law rocket. Although it looks like the real thing, it does not contain an explosive charge. The ATF also installs a radio transmitter so agents can track the device from a distance. The inert rocket is ready. The trap is set. On July 29th, the task force launches the operation.
Take out an aircraft. Tracking device.
On July 29th, 1986, the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force launches a complex sting operation. Agents will attempt to sell a dummy Law rocket to the El Rukns, a gang of vicious drug dealers who are willing to sell out their own country to Libyan terrorists. Gang leader Jeff Fort takes the bait. He tells Alan Knox to set up the buy.
And we're hearing this on the wiretap after the meeting, so we know that it's going to go forward. The arrangements which were basically given to us by the El Rukns was we were going to meet them, or the transaction was going to occur
task force meets to plan the sting operation. The sale of the law rocket will go down at a hotel in Lansing, Illinois, 30 miles from Chicago.
Normally, we would have never conducted an undercover investigation like this because of the extreme danger to Agent Hulan. But the fact that we knew that the Rukns were dealing with the Libyans, we had to weigh those risks and ultimately decided that we could do it safely, that we could make the transaction safely and protect the life of our undercover agent.
Surveillance teams will form the outer perimeter, 4 blocks from the hotel.
Like I said, ultimately,
SWAT and undercover teams will form an inner perimeter, stationed in and around the hotel.
What's going to happen with our operation? At this point, we have the north, south.
On July 31st, agents from the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, and the Chicago Police Department deployed to the hotel in Lansing, Illinois. They cannot fail. The lives of hundreds and possibly thousands of people are at stake.
On the night of the law rocket deal, we probably had in excess of 50 individuals spread out through different areas.
Surveillance teams assigned to the outer perimeter get into position. At 6:30 p.m., a car enters the perimeter. There are 2 men inside. Agents are unable to identify either one of them. Detective Wheat's surveillance team picks up the incoming vehicle. He follows it to a gas station nearby. At the gas station, Wheat is able to make a positive ID. Melvin Mays is the driver. Alan Knox is in the passenger seat.
Moments after Melvin had departed the gas station, we saw him go in toward the inner perimeter. We passed on the plate number of the vehicle, the color of the vehicle, the make of the vehicle, all pertinent information that would help us keep this vehicle under surveillance.
At the hotel, task force members get into position.
We had a complement of SWAT, other surveillance people, other case agents in adjacent rooms, down hallways, different floors. Everything to control that situation. We didn't want people from another floor coming up. We didn't want to have citizens who weren't a part of this deal getting caught in the crossfire if that happened. The outer teams were prepared to move in to help secure this area in the event that things went wrong, so that it was plenty of firepower there on hand to deal with any situation that might develop.
Mays and Knox arrive at the hotel within minutes. The sale is about to go down. The task force is ready. They know the Rukns are willing to do whatever it takes to fulfill Jeff Fort's orders and make the buy. On the night of July 31st, 1986, 2 members of the Rukn gang arrive at a hotel in Lansing, Illinois. They have arranged to purchase a light anti-tank rocket. Their goal, to prove to the Libyan government that the Rukns can operate as terrorists for hire. They have no idea that the man they are dealing with is an undercover FBI agent. Members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force can hear every word of the transaction. Detective Fred Wheat and his surveillance team is stationed 4 blocks from the hotel.
We heard a knock on the door. We could actually hear the physical knock. We heard some voices and someone asked who it was, etc. He was admitted into the room. We could hear them negotiate or talk about the sale of the rocket. to launch. A little something extra I threw in.
You can't see the rocket launcher. Where's it at?
It's on the photo. You know I don't do business like that. Where's the cash?
It's close.
You get your launcher when I get my cash.
A few minutes later, Melvin Mays leaves the hotel. He needs to get final confirmation from gang leader Jeff Fort before the sale can be completed. Mays returns to El Rukn headquarters to wait for Fort's call.
Jeff Fort controlled every aspect of the El Rukn organization, to include this transaction.
The wiretap picks up the phone call between Mays and Jeff Fort. Fort seems leery about the buy. He's worried that it's a setup. Fort instructs Mays to bring a young gang member back with him. They should arrive at the hotel in separate cars. If the buy is a setup, Jeff Fort would rather sacrifice a low-level gang member than risk one of his generals.
In other words, Fort did not want any contact or any trading of money between the undercover agents who he suspected and his generals.
Fort orders him to deliver the money to the hotel and then pick up the law rocket. The sale goes off without a hitch.
What you think? Maybe, sir. Still out there, right? Buddy doing business with you?
The El Rukns have no idea that the law rocket is a dummy. The low-level El Rukn takes off in the direction of Chicago. Surveillance units follow him onto the Dan Ryan Expressway.
At that point, we had surveillance behind them, in front of them, on the side of them, down the expressway, coming on at certain exits, getting off at certain exits.
Suddenly, the young gang member transporting the law rocket pulls over and stops. Seconds later, another vehicle pulls alongside him. It's Melvin Mays.
What are you doing? Stop.
As it turns out, the gang member's car has broken down. The law rocket is transferred to Mays' car.
Get back in your car.
We would not have known that it changed from one vehicle to the other or one person to the other unless we had a physical eye on that transaction.
The law rocket had been equipped with a radio transmitter, and we were using electronic equipment and physical surveillance to follow the rocket back to where they eventually stored it.
Mays drives to an apartment building on South Kenwood Avenue, a few miles from El Rukn headquarters. The gang members refer to this building as the Armory.
Then our job really began, because at that point we were 24/7 on that location, because we had to make sure that that law rocket was not moved.
Special Agent Ned Hamara continues to monitor the wiretap.
A couple days went by. Fort's fears were allayed that they weren't police, and in subsequent conversations, he says, okay, let's buy 5 more. You know, we want 5 more, and we're going to test one.
Task force members are worried. Fort has chosen a target to prove his terrorist capabilities. He intends to kill a Chicago police detective.
The detective who was kind of, he worked for the Gang Crimes Chicago Police Department, who was kind of a thorn for many years in the Rukn side. They hated him, and they figured, okay, we're going to buy some rockets, but we're going to use one, and we're going to test it on him.
Gentlemen, according to the wiretap,
The attorneys and the agents all made the decision, okay, let's take it down now. Let's not wait any further, because we figured if they tried to test the law rocket, they're going to determine that it's a dummy rocket and it's going to blow a lot of people's cover.
The FBI makes a dangerous call. It's time to take down the El Rukn gang and put Jeff Fort behind bars forever. The FBI has the El Rukn gang on the hook. They have surveillance photos and wiretaps of the gang purchasing a dummy law rocket. From his prison in Texas, gang leader Jeff Fort instructs the El Rukns to buy 5 more rockets. He wants to test fire one of them to prove that his gang can perform terrorist hits for hire.
gentlemen, according to the wire,
We had to prevent the Rukns from actually doing something to try to impress the Libyans. We felt it prudent at that time that we'd gone along far enough, we had enough evidence to at least put them behind bars for at least weapon charges, if not the terrorist activities. We weren't going to take the chances that they were going to get a law rocket from an outside source and use it.
A live law rocket in the hands of a violent gang like the El Rukns would be catastrophic.
I think everybody decided it was time to take it down.
On the morning of August 5th, the task force launches simultaneous raids on El Rukn headquarters and on the apartment building they call the Armory.
That building at 39th and Drexel was a fortified fort. It had steel doors on both the front and rear and iron gates across the other doors. We had to use a burning bar that day to gain entry into the fort to execute our search warrant.
Go, 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 go!
We went from surveillance officers to search and control officers. We began systematically arresting across the city all individuals that were involved in this plot.
In an office at El Rukn headquarters, authorities find travel itineraries to Libya for Rico Cranshaw and Leon McAnderson. The second arrest team raids the apartment building on South Kenwood Avenue.
I was at the location on South Kenwood. Our main objective was to find the law rocket. We're walking all through the complex, you know, behind the ATF agent who's got the beacon, and he's going upstairs and downstairs and all around. Oh, it's getting fader, we're getting stronger. We were in there for, it seemed like a half hour, and we're walking and we're still not getting it. Finally, we go down into the basement. And this is a rat-infested, roach-infested location. But when we're going down the stairs, it gets louder and louder and louder.
It's getting stronger right down here.
Finally, we decided it's got to be under the stairwell. So we ripped open the stairwell, and sure enough, the law rocket was there, along with about 35 other assortment of automatic weapons that we discovered. Some of them were submachine guns. Who knows, how many weapons were used in crimes or murders or what. The main thing, we got the law rocket back before they were able to determine that it, was an inert or a dummy law rocket.
Hands up, hands up, hands up, hands up!
McAnderson and Cranshaw are arrested without incident. Alan Knox is also taken into custody. Melvin Mays is nowhere to be found. On October 30th, 1986, Jeff Fort, Alan Knox, Rico Cranshaw, and Leon McAnderson are indicted on charges of conspiracy, possession of weapons, and use of interstate facilities to carry on unlawful activities. Melvin Mays, who is still a fugitive, is placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. In 1987, McAnderson and Cranshaw are convicted and sentenced to more than 50 years in prison. Melvin Mays eludes authorities for nearly 9 years. In 1995, he is arrested and convicted and sentenced to 3 life terms in prison. Jeff Fort, who is already incarcerated, is sentenced to spend an additional 80 years in prison.
This was the first instance in the United States history that American citizens had been convicted for attempting to commit a terrorist act for a foreign government.
For Chicago police, the El Rukn case is a major victory. A dangerous street gang has been destroyed. For the FBI, the El Rukn case is a battle won in the ongoing war against terrorism.